This is a what if history video, and this time it is on Elizabeth I. What if she had been a man? I have three kind of segments in this video for you where I'm going to discuss basically what I think would have happened in terms of marriage. Then I would discuss what would have happened in terms of ruling and the church. And then I would discuss what would have happened in terms of power and empire and the rivalry with Philip II of Spain. First and foremost, I really believe that if Elizabeth had been a man, she would have tried, like her father, to secure the dynasty. Why that? Because the risk of herself losing her life giving birth would have gone away by being a man. So I think she would have been as well, quite like her father and her grandfather, Henry VII, quite obsessed with having heirs to the throne. And for that, she would have needed a partner. So let's discuss the partners that she could have had. And I think that Catherine de' Medici, as you know, she pushed all her sons into the arms of Elizabeth I. And I think she would have done the exact same thing with her daughters. I still don't think that she would have pushed Elizabeth of Valois. I think it's pretty clear she would have offered either Claude, who would become Duchess of Lorraine, or Marguerite of Valois. I think that Catherine de' Medici would have been very interested in making one of her daughters Queen of England. And for that, she would have tried everything and any type of discussions and negotiations. And for her, it would have been a main goal. Now, do I think that Elizabeth I would have chosen a Catholic as a bride? Probably not. I think Elizabeth I, and that's why we're going to discuss government, ruling, and the Church of England, would have remained a very strong Protestant king. I don't think that at any moment she would have changed her mind. And I think she would not have risked to have a Catholic bride. This is why it's so interesting when you talk to people and historians who think that if Elizabeth or Mary Stuart had been a man, maybe one of them could have been together and the two kingdoms would have joined together. And I think it would have been appealing, even for Elizabeth, to have Scotland and England. It would have played a very big part in her decision. But the fact that Mary Stuart was so strongly Catholic, and I think the Guises really disliked, Protestantism, I don't think that it would have actually been an option. I don't think it would have happened. I don't think that even if we're trying to reimagine the past, which we're doing in these what if videos, I don't think this is something that would have worked. And in a way, it's a big shame because, as I said, it would have brought a union much sooner, much closer. But I also think that the personalities, Elizabeth, even as a man, and Mary Stuart would have clashed. All right, so now I have Catholic bride, Catholic queen, probably not, especially with what happened with Mary I and Philip II. But I think that there would have been some very interesting suitors, and two of them are the sisters of Sweden. Gustav I of Sweden had daughters to offer to Europe, and he was really looking into having his daughters placed on very important diplomatic, thrones in Europe. He offered his son, Eric XIV of Sweden, to Elizabeth, and it did not work. This match did not work. However, I believe that Elizabeth, if she had been a man, she would have been more inclined to look into these daughters of Gustav. Actually, one of them, Cecilia of Sweden, spent some time in England in 1565. So I really believe here that it would have happened, that something would have happened, it would have been a great match for Elizabeth, especially to establish England as a strong Protestant country, to have this strong alliance with Sweden, a Protestant country, and to ensure that Protestantism was implemented in the north of Europe. It would have been, I think, a very interesting dynastic match for Elizabeth. And I believe that though there are other sisters such as Catherine or such as Anna, I think that the one who would have had a chance would have been Cecilia of Sweden. Probably basing this claim here on the real history, because Cecilia did spend some time in England. But I really think as well that their personalities, the fact that they became friends, meant that they were kind of a good match. And so if Elizabeth had been a man, I think she would have made probably Cecilia, Princess of Sweden, his queen. What's so very interesting is that before even Cecilia spent some time in England with Elizabeth, they did exchange lots of letters for several years, and they seem that they have felt admiration for each other, which again makes me believe that it would have probably been a good match. Cecilia resided at Bedford House in London as a residence, where she was welcomed by the Countess of Sussex and the wife of William Cecil. So here it was a very important official state affair. So again, with all this in mind, I think she's the right, perfect match for Elizabeth if she had been a man. Now, if we talked about ruling and government in the Church of England, what do I think? I think Elizabeth would not have called herself governor of the Church of England, but head of the Church of England, like her father Henry VIII did. If she had been a man, there would have been absolutely no opposition. Now, when it comes to William Cecil, Francis Walsingham, or Robert Dudley, obviously this relationship would have been very much different. I think Robert Dudley would still have been like a very close advisor. He would have been kind of a best friend. They would have still there's still this friendship that I think would have happened, because again, it's not because she's a man and she has a different personality, so I think they would have got on really well. She probably would have favored him less, because there probably would not have been this kind of love or caring or whatever we want to call a romantic relationship that we can call. With Cecil, I think the power dynamic would have been a bit different, though I do, and I still claim that Elizabeth was very much in charge of her government as a woman. So I don't think that as a man she would have been more in charge. But I think that William Cecil would not have been too pushy. And I think it's because of the question of succession and marriage was such an important issue during the reign of Elizabeth I, that we have that kind of William Cecil pushing for Elizabeth to get a husband. Here she would have probably would have listened to him already. So I don't think we would have had the same problem. Also, because she would have been a man, I think there would have been less conspiracies and plots against her. It's something maybe, we can discuss in the comments, we can disagree, I don't know, you can tell me what you think. But here I really think that the kind of balance would have been very different. I think Walsingham would have had a less important role in the government, probably because these plots and conspiracies would have happened less often. I also think that Elizabeth would have been a bit more like her father on that front. I think she would have shown that she could be completely ruthless. But in the end, I believe that the dynamics would not have been so different with her privy councillors. And she probably would have had as well all these women around her, and probably would have had mistresses as well. But what's very hard to say here is because the women who were around her were sometimes part of a family, so obviously that would not have worked. So it's very hard to know who would have played that role for her. Probably Cecil's, daughters would have been pushed into Elizabeth's arms if she had been a man. We can imagine that. Walsingham's maybe as well. Walsingham's daughters. It's a possibility as well. And but I think she would have been, even more kind of open about it, because obviously Elizabeth is known for her favourites. And I think she would have had female favourites. The last point of this video on what if Elizabeth had been a man, would it have been different in terms of empire, war, and the great rivalry with Philip II? I actually think probably not. Elizabeth on that front used to behave, in my eyes, like a man. When you look at what she's done, in terms of the New World, she would have done the exact same thing. She would have favoured Drake, Raleigh, Hawkins. And so I think the rivalry with Philip II would have been very strong. Maybe a bit more in terms because, when it's two men, maybe Philip II would have attacked much earlier. It is a possibility, though we know that he tried to attack earlier than that, but it was because of Drake that kept attacking, Spanish ports, that he couldn't do it. So I really don't think here we would have had a massive difference. if Elizabeth had been a man. I just think the rivalry would have been maybe more outright, and maybe the war would have started a bit earlier, because obviously as a woman she could play, you know, this type of, oh, I want to marry you. Maybe it would have started much earlier, as soon as she became King of England. I think her relationship with France would have been a bit more different and a bit more hostile, especially if Catherine realised that Elizabeth had no interest in her daughters, which I think she would have had no interest in her daughters. So I think that the rivalry between France would have played another role and would have created more problems. Now with Mary Stuart, who would not have been able to be a match for Elizabeth, I really don't believe that Elizabeth would have taken the risk to have a Catholic queen by her side if she had been a man. So here I think that France would have been probably a greater threat. I think that's the biggest difference. If Elizabeth had been a man, I think the Anglo-French relations would have suffered much early on, and probably would have a type of war like we had, in medieval ages. Because at the end of the day, there's a massive big rivalry between France and England, and because there are so many kings, like Henry II, Francis II, Charles IX, Henry III, Henry IV, it's very hard for an English king, for example, to establish a strong friendship. Even Henry VIII and Francis I, it's a bromance, but it's also a big rivalry. There's friendship, but they end up being at war as well. And here, when you keep changing, the French king, I think it's very hard to adapt. And so I think it would have been more hostile and less diplomatic. They would not have been able to have very strong and to maintain this kind of marriage negotiations, because Elizabeth's goal would have been to have a queen and to secure the line. So again, I think that would have been the massive big difference if Elizabeth had been a man. I really hope you enjoyed that video on what if in history. I really enjoyed making it, as you can see. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!